Now, before we get started, I want to shortly present again our experts. 6 they are. So I'm going to start here on the left. Laura Kovacs, she is full professor at in computer science at TU Wien. And she is into the design of new theories, technologies, tools for automating software analysis and verification. You heard her talk this morning about this. Second from the left is my colleague, Johanna Ullrich. She is key researcher at SBA Research. She focuses on topics like network security and power grid security. Third from the left, company SBA Research. Did I say that? No, I did say it. Stefan Jakoubi, also SBA Research. He is the head of professional services at SBA Research, and he has a very strong management and organizational security focus. So he's not a developer, but he is working on ISMS, for example. Philippe de Ryck, he is the founder of Pragmatic Web Security. He is instructor of web security. He did a 2-day bootcamp the last 2 days and also held the keynote this morning. Then we have Pascal Schulz, second from the right. He is a T-security engineer at Dynatrace. You might remember his talk from last year where he presented the bug bounty program they run at Dynatrace. And he's also doing penetration testing there. And then we have Stefan Wierckx. He is consultant at Tore on security, which is kind of the SBA Research of Belgium, I think. And he's a project leader of the OWASP threat model project. And he also does consulting in software development, lifecycle security, and things related. Okay, so please give a welcome applause to our experts panel.
Just one thing because of Slido. So if you have a question for one person dedicated, so just also let us know in the question.
Okay. I'll start with a generic question that pretty much everybody in software development asks themselves. What we have nowadays is a lot of pressure of innovation. So if you want to be on the market with our products, it's supposed to be as fast as possible. We need to be agile. We need to deploy software multiple times per day, per hour, or even per minute in an extreme case. What can we do to enable security to keep pace with this development? Microphones are here, and now they are turned on. So whoever wants to start a discussion on this, how can we keep pace with agility?
So I think the key point there will be the existing processes you already have. Just try to add some security in there. Don't try to invent a new process, because that will just make sure that you get slower.
What does that mean? Very concretely, what does the average developer need to do?
So when you were to look at development, I'm assuming that you're going agile. If you work in a CI/CD pipeline, you already do a daily stand-up. You're already discussing the things that you're going to do today and the problems you had yesterday. So any point in there where you can discuss or add some more security on things, or just remind people on some important items that they would have to check, just add it in there. That would already help.
Mm-hmm. Feel free.
I think an important step there is, if you want to go that fast, is that you're going to have to grow in that direction. It's not something you decide like, hey, we're building this monolith every 3 months and tomorrow we're going to deploy every 5 minutes. It doesn't go like that. It goes in slower steps and gradually. And you have to think about security from the beginning. You have to think about security when you start doing that and start working on things. And I think one of the good examples to look at is Netflix. That's one of the notorious companies that actually deploys every couple of minutes. They deploy one production service somewhere. Nobody knows where, but they still do.
Different question.
And they built a whole bunch of tooling around that. They have a lot of security engineers actually building specific security tools for their pipeline to automate testing and to automate handling of certain things and all of that. So I think if you really want to go there, first of all, my first advice is really think about whether you need that, because it's a whole different game than what you're used to playing. And if you want to, then take a look at Netflix, what they're doing, look at their tools that they have built and what they are doing in a modern environment today. They give conference talks as well, so you'll find talks at conferences like AppSec Cali and things like that, where Netflix talks about what they're doing, how they're doing it, and what the challenges are of moving in that direction.
And many of their tools are open source, by the way, so find them on GitHub.
Yes,
as well.
but very underdocumented often, so enjoy that.
I think Pascal wanted to add something.
Yeah, so for me, the key is definitely to go for automation. So as a security team, I guess classic, and in a classical approach, we tended to do all our stuff manually, but in this highly paced HR world, we need to get out tools, like you said, referring to Netflix. I think they're referring to it as the security paved road, what they're always saying. So you basically want to make it super easy for developers out there and take the burden and the responsibility off them. So you have to come up with tools and frameworks where it's actually not even possible anymore to run into security issues. So where you can focus again on like the development process rather than having to think of 1,000 different vulnerabilities that you have to cover. That's super important.
I think if I can add one more thing, if you want to move towards such a deployment model, it's vastly different from what a lot of companies use. So a lot of companies build something, it goes to QA to test and to make sure it's safe, and they consider that kind of a safety net. So in case developers make mistakes, it will be caught in that safety net before it goes out, and we can still fix it. You lose that safety net if you move towards continuous deployment. So the moment you start deploying a few times a day, then there's not going to be QA in the mix to make sure everything is fine. There's not going to be a pen test to sign off on that. And that means your developers will need to be able to write secure code. So if you rely on that safety net for security, then I strongly recommend to first make sure your developers know how to build better applications, how to write secure code before you get rid of that safety net and hope things will work out, because they won't.
I want to add another thought of mine when I'm listening to that. I think we also have to define what's the meaning of agile. I think the agile for software development teams, there's total other understanding. In the management field, agile oftentimes means fast. Fast implementation, faster time to market, no time for actual things like security. So my point to that discussion is more management awareness, where to put the focus that we can bring security on the left side, so on the start, with requirements analysis and so on, and clearly defining that agile doesn't mean necessarily fast, time to market.
Someone mentioned tools and automation. There was a question from the audience where they asked whether there are tools out there that are free to use. Is there anything that I can just grab and take and run and it will help me get into the right direction in terms of security testing?
Yes.
So which ones?
Which
was the
ones
question
are
on
they?
Slido?
Are there some you can recommend?
Well, I'm going to answer what the people in my workshop, they will remember this answer. It depends. That's a very generic question, like, what will help me with security testing? Like, I don't know, what are you testing? So, yes, there are a whole lot of tools out there, a whole lot of useful tools, tools that check for known vulnerabilities and dependencies, a lot of OWASP tools that do very useful things. A lot of vendors have free services that they offer to get you started, or free services for open source software, which is very, very admirable. So, yes, there's a lot of tools out there, but unless you have a very specific question about what tool can I use to do this specific task, it's going to be hard to give concrete recommendations. But yeah, there's a bunch of tools out there, absolutely.
I read an interesting question here. The story of the worst security mistake you have personally witnessed, or at a client, for example. Don't mention the client, please.
Can I call my lawyer first?
I have a story. It was not directly on security testing, but on software testing when I was an intern more than 10 years ago. And basically we were asked to do module tests, although the system tests were already successfully completed at the client. And then we asked for the specification we should test against. And they didn't have one, so they had an automated tool which made these diagrams from the code. And I had to test the code against these diagrams. So actually I was testing the software that made these diagrams and not the actual code. Yeah? That was 1 month internship about 10 years ago.
I can remember when we told the client that he had a general problem with the vulnerability class of SQL injections. And for example, here in this login field, client said, okay, I fixed it, 5 lines below, no fix. So, good.
Same thing again.
So I'm going to answer the question in the sense that Philippe did this morning. I think when we look at these horror stories, you need to ask yourself the question, this thing that happened, was it because the people involved didn't know any better, or did they actually know they had to do stuff and they were on purpose not solving the problem when they knew there was one? I think many of these horror stories are about people who simply did not know they had to look for a problem or fix a problem. So not exactly fair to point to those because they simply did their best. I think when we look around us in the things that get published, we look for things where we find people who should have known better and still missed the mark, or who on purpose didn't implement a bunch of things. So those would be the stories I would be looking for. I just don't have any personal ones to tell you.
Or you can't. You're not allowed to.
Yeah, I'm kind of having the same issue here. Right? I cannot talk about the ones that I find at Dynatrace, but I guess a pretty common, and I will show this if you're here tomorrow evening, and in my talk I will show this in there as well. One of the biggest issues still, or I think it's even getting bigger, is information disclosure, sensitive information disclosure, and you have so many new tokens, secrets, whatever, that a lot of applications and tools nowadays use, right, and need to work. And then developers out there, they just put them in the source code and publish them on GitHub or wherever. And even if people know about it, it's just so easy to mistakenly drop a secret in the code and then make it public. And I guess this is, to me, one of the biggest horror stories that happens to all the companies all over the globe every single day. And I'll actually show you a nice little tool tomorrow where you can see a lot of secrets getting disclosed every single second.
Is it a free tool?
Yeah.
Awesome. So there are free tools that can help you find. Come tomorrow at the closing session and he'll fill you in. Maybe one story to add here is, well, I don't have too many live issues because I talk to developers, I don't fix issues, so I hear a lot of stories. And one thing really struck me. I was teaching a course for a company, and that was the second day of the class, was a secure coding course. And the second day of the class, one of the participants comes to me during the break and it's like, yeah, you know, sorry if I'm a bit tired today because it's hard to concentrate. And I was like, yeah, sure, that happens. We all have times like that, especially after lunch. And he keeps going like, yeah, the stuff you talked about yesterday was really, really interesting. And I built this system for my dad's business, and I realized that I thought it was kind of good, but after hearing your sessions on SQL injection and login problems and all of that, I realized that I kind of missed the ball. So I was up all night fixing the problems and implementing the things the right way to make sure that my dad's business doesn't get in trouble by suffering from these issues. So I think there are indeed a lot of problems, like Stefan says, and these things do exist because, let's face it, if I ask you to cook a lobster, you're kind of guessing you're going to screw it up unless you're a really good chef. And that's normal because it's something that takes skill to learn. And I am actually a chef and I probably screw it up either as well because lobster is really difficult to cook. Just saying that the same goes for security, and people do their best and make mistakes, and that's not a problem in my opinion. Things happen as long as you take responsibility for them and handle that. As long as you don't be the Equifax of Austria, I'm kind of guessing that things will work out and you will be able to build a better product. By the way, I learned this morning that the t-shirts had a scorpion. Sorry for calling it a code lobster.
I was showing the email to colleagues.
Yeah.
Philippe thinks it's a lobster.
I'm an idiot, so.
It's a scorpion, yeah. Yeah.
I have a question, and so what are the effects, or like the most dangerous effects you see of insecure software on the real world? And I would like to start with the academic point of view, so where you see...
So when I was in Sweden, I'm still partially in Sweden, although I'm here now, I had a really so at the point, I wanted to actually answer something on the very first question, because in academia we have a slightly different culture. I mean, I think many of you might think that in academia we just have fun and we don't do normal work, and you know, I actually have my student actually sometimes says, I want to go out to industry and have a normal job. Okay, welcome to reality. So there's one important thing in academia, because you were thinking about the innovation pressure. And in academic research, if you have no innovation, then you're really screwed up. So if you don't come first, then you have no chance. You can, and basically our turnaround, it's 3 months. In 3 months' time, we have to publish. If someone, it's actually happening quite often that multiple groups work in parallel, we don't know who is coming first. We evaluate ourselves against others. If they publish ahead us, that's it. We cannot even do anything. We have good results. They were first. We can just forget the result. Mm-hmm. So we have this innovation pressure. It's there, but what we have in academia, which I think it's very different with respect to software development, that we like to do this kind of abstractions. We have 10 different problems. We find one common feature of them, and we consider these 10 different problems as one big class of problems. Whereas if you really go to real code developments, you will treat them most likely very specific. You have very different pre-processing techniques, and therefore, so this innovation pressure we do have in academia, but it's very different in respect to software development, like really like the hackers or the developers, as you want yourself to be called. Now coming back to, this is just a comment that I wanted to make. So, for instance, our own tool, it's run 24 hours a day. So we continuously train the data set. We continuously train our tool. So, but like I said, our benchmarks might be not as big as probably your big benchmarks, but they are at least as hard in many of the cases as your benchmarks. So it's not like total gap between the two communities. Mm-hmm. And then when I was in Sweden, I was working with Volvo cars. I mean, actually, it was Volvo trucks. And it was in 2015, and it was really this all hype of getting autonomous cars. And one software manager from Volvo car was there, and we really raised the question, so what will you do about security? Because once you are running your autonomous car, you're doing, many things will be operated through the software, so what do you do about security? And then that was one striking question, which I think as an academic he would never answer, but he was saying it openly, so I think I'm allowed to repeat it. He was saying we will consider security once there will be a security failure during an autonomous car accident. I think now has been there many, but this is really something which I think as an academic perspective, and maybe it's imperfection, you might call it perfection, we try to analyze first all possible worst case scenarios and then implement, or then develop the theory and implement the tool. I'm not saying it's the best. I think it should be a mix. First, I think it should be there. First, understand what consequences you can have by implementing a particular theory or a particular method, and then implement it, rather just implement and then see what consequences you get. Mm-hmm.
I see the problem that with ongoing digitalization, that software also spreads towards fields where it hasn't been before, or that devices are connected that haven't been connected before. And this has multiple consequences. On the first thing, usually you interfere with the real world, so security vulnerabilities actually have an impact, like with cars. I also have experience with projects in the car environment, and we see this problem. And the second thing is it needed more than a decade to come to a stable level of security in IT, and we still have issues, but here we are solving software code that is written by IT and people from IT try to solve it, so they are from the same domain. But if we now have all these IoT devices and cyber-physical systems, or however you want to call it, these systems are built by other domains, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, and now they have to become secure, and then you have more domains involved, and this doesn't make it easier, because usually the terminology already is different, and the first thing is to gain a common ground and a common understanding, and this takes longer.
Now, before I change to a slightly different topic, I want to ask one question about automation in the software development process, because there's a question from the audience. How do you incorporate security in your agile process? How is security discussed in a story planning meeting? So, are we discussing software features, and then we stop and say, now security? Is this the way it works, or how can we do that? I guess the question goes in that direction.
So I'll answer with the standard answer there. You'll just need to try it out, see what works for you, and keep doing that. And if it doesn't work, you need to try something else, because every one of the organizations that I've been to implement the agile methodologies like Scrum or Kanban slightly differently. So there is no clear-cut answer, because nobody's following exactly the same process. Yeah. The only thing you need to realize is you need to think hard about the process. And if you're doing Scrum and you're doing, for example, a daily stand-up, you need to realize why you're doing that. What is the benefit? What is the problem that you're solving with it? And then just try to figure out how security would fit into that one. So that is an easy answer for me, because I'm not the one who has to do it.
One thing that we do, and this is pretty new to our company, but we started going into the direction of value creation teams, and that basically means you pick out, if it's a feature, a new component, and you need people from a lot of different teams, you pick out people from different teams, like I just said, and then obviously there should be, if it's security related or critical, security person in there as well, and then in my opinion, it's up to this person to bring security into those stand-ups of those value creation teams, into the review and planning sessions, and just be there and make sure that security is part of the feature. Mm-hmm.
Now, one special question goes towards passwords and whether they're going to stick around or not. There's also the question says, FIDO2 won't solve all authentication needs, and we will be stuck with passwords in many cases. Do we have to rethink password security? For example, fix password entropy. Now, many vulnerabilities, first, are in that area that concern authentication. On the other hand, also of common people that are not in software development or IT, the one thing that they perceive from security is passwords, and they hate them. So, is this going to change in the near future with things like FIDO2 and technologies like these?
It depends.
Your answers are pretty predictable.
Yes, I know. That's how it goes. Usually there's never an easy answer.
Yeah.
Honestly, I have very mixed feelings about passwords. Passwords, on one hand, are absolutely evil if you see how many problems there are. I just read a report from Akamai, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, where they observed, they looked at financial APIs, and they observed over a period of 2 years like an insane amount of something they called credential abuse, fraudulent logins. And I calculated that back, and that came out to about 1,850 attempts per second, averaged over 2 years, continuously. That's insane. So yes, passwords are really problematic, combined with data breaches and password reuse and so on. On the other hand, passwords are something that everybody understands. Everybody hates them, but they know what a password is, they know how a password works. Have you tried explaining a YubiKey to your parents? Like, this is this key and there's no identity link to it, but if you insert it and hit the button and the website still knows, it's like, it doesn't work very well. Mm-hmm. And it's expensive. And same thing with SMS-based authentication is also not very good, and these authenticators are challenging to use and so on. So I don't think passwords are going away. I think we're going to be stuck with passwords for a long time. I think there's two major improvements. First of all, we have password managers, which is a good thing. Password managers are getting better. Companies are getting awareness that they should be using a password manager. They're buying that. That's good. Chrome has it built in, which is also a good option. And then the second thing is you have these new authentication APIs called web authentication in the browser, which allow to use your phone as an authenticator or your MacBook, like the fingerprint scanner on your MacBook, as an authenticator for websites. And behind the scenes, it uses public-private key authentication, which is really, really secure compared to passwords, so it's really good. And it's becoming well supported. So I'm hopeful that we will I'm kind of thinking we'll always have passwords as option one, but we can hopefully evolve into some kind of a system where we will have web authentication as a very useful mechanism, because people don't need to know how it works. It just works, and that might help.
It will depend on platform support in the end of the day.
Yes, but everybody seems to be on board with that, and platform support is actually pretty good. Modern Android has everything it needs to act as an authenticator on your phone. So basically your browser can send a message to your phone. I think it uses Bluetooth or something, and your phone is like, hey, do you want to authenticate to this website? And you're like, yes, done. And that's pretty awesome, and we can hopefully get there.
Anything to add?
Yeah, I think you were saying, they were also asking about the entropy of the password.
Yeah.
In my opinion, and we've seen this change by NIST, right? I think it was 3 years ago when they changed their criteria for secure passwords, going away from like the password has to be super complicated, more into a direction saying the password has to be long, right? And I guess it's important for companies also to adapt to that criteria, to make passwords stronger by following that NIST criteria that they published those couple of months ago. And in that sense, passwords are then getting easier for people to remember then as well, because you can just use a very long sentence that actually makes sense to you instead of using a lot of special characters, but they would still be secure, right? And I also don't think that passwords are going to, I don't know, be something out of the past within the next couple of years. But yeah, and they only need to be used of the criteria that are common these days. I guess that's important.
Yeah. I want to push the discussion towards a little bit different direction. Now, you mentioned companies like, truck producing, car producing companies. None of those companies produces all the software themselves, so they will have some sort of outsourcing. Now, who is responsible for the security of the software when it's outsourced? Is it the creator of the, I know it depends. And how is responsibility perceived in your perspective on the side of the consumer and on the side of the company that produces the software? Who is ultimately responsible?
So for
Stefan,
a consumer, it's going to be the producer of the product that you buy. Maybe legally, there's a different way to look at it. I think from our point of view, when you look at it ethically, if your company produces software, especially if there is some kind of a safety or potential safety problem at some point, then you are ethically bound to at least give it your best shot to make it secure. But yeah, legally speaking, that's going to be really difficult.
If there was a law that you could create to maybe point that down legally, what would that be? If you were in a position to create a law?
I'm not a lawyer, so that's a really difficult question. I think if you want to make it somewhat simple, then at the end you need to have one person or let's say one organization responsible, and that is probably, if you want to keep it somewhat easy, the easiest one is the one who's actually selling the product. That's going to be the easiest.
Yeah. Over here?
I would say the same, go into the same direction. I mean, tomorrow Lucas Feiler, attorney,
Yes.
will answer this question better. the utmost responsibility is in management who sells the products. I think another interesting question is who pays for security? That's maybe another discussion we could also think about, because currently, I think Lucas said he hates DevSecOps because that means the security is optional. We are at the moment, the point in time, I think security is too optional, and who's willing to pay for it gets security, and who's not willing to pay for it doesn't get enough security. And this is a huge problem, because you have to raise budgets for that. Development teams are fighting budgets and time. Typically, who's responsible for security? Is it CISO? CISO doesn't have an own budget for that. So the hot potato is going in a round within the company who will pay at the end of the day for security. Customer might pay the best price, so maybe not. The reseller, the supplier wants money for that, so totally wrong discussion, wrong direction. But I think it's the world we live currently in, and at the moment I'm not a fan of regulations, but at the point in time where we are now, I'm hoping for more stricter regulations, so that's no discussion anymore about security.
Anything to add from your side here?
This is actually a question which one of the most interesting for me, even if you assume we are giving away licenses and we are giving away our product, and then people build upon our product and in a way that they don't really understand the consequences. So now the question comes back, who is responsible? Are we or are they, because they don't understand the consequence? I don't think it's that easy, like legally controlling it. Mm.
What can I do as a company who outsources something, or as an organization, doesn't have to be a company, anything?
So one of my customers is big on outsourcing, and they still bring me in for training because security only gets built in the product if it's part of the specification. If the specification says like, hey, you have to do things like this and this and this, and we expect that and that to happen, then the people will build it, but you can't expect them to know to do security out of the box. Well, for some things you should, but in reality you probably cannot. Especially if it depends on where you're outsourcing and how much control you have. But I also see a lot of companies coming back from outsourcing because they realize that it doesn't work very well. Mm. So I see a lot of big companies, they have offices in India, they just hire the people themselves and put them in an office there instead of hiring an outsourcing firm, because the rotation is much too big in an outsourcing. They have new people every couple of weeks, and it's impossible to get some kind of a standard and to educate people and so on. Mm. But I would say ultimately it's the responsibility of the company writing out a spec of what they want. If they don't add security, then they shouldn't be surprised that it's not there in the end. So yeah, that's where the ball goes, I would say, or the ball lies. Mm-hmm.
Also a very good question from the audience. With all your knowledge about unpatched vulnerabilities, how do you resist joining the dark side? Could make a lot of money with it, I guess. It depends.
Is this on or off the record? Well, first of all, I said this morning, I'm not a hacker in a sense that, okay, no. If it's about unpatched vulnerabilities, I would be able to exploit them, because if the exploit is out there, like the Equifax struts vulnerability, honestly, I would never be able to find that thing myself. It's insanely difficult to find, and there's probably a handful of people in the world that can do it. But when they find it, they publish it, because that's what the people finding exploits do. And once they publish it, there's going to be a string somewhere that says, execute this command, and I can replace that with something else, and then, of course, I can run the exploit. So once the exploit is there, it's not that difficult to find things. What is stopping me? Well, first of all, norms and morals. It's kind of wrong to do that. What's stopping you from stealing stuff from the store? It's really, really easy to do that as well. Yet, I'm kind of guessing most of you don't do that. So that's a good thing, by the way, so congratulations. So what's stopping me there? Honestly, I'm in no way interested in doing that. That's the short answer. It wouldn't be very right, and I'm just as well not interested in stealing stuff or killing people just for fun, kicks, or money.
How about you?
Well, I just can add, I guess most of us have family, that's also maybe another reason. And the second is that we also make a good life by keeping to the standards and the norms, so why change?
I wanted to bring an analogy. I mean, just think about being a professional football player, right? Like you have 10 good years, and after that you cannot earn $1 million anymore by playing for Bayern Munich, right? So you need a plan B after that. It's the same with going to the dark side. Like, what is your plan B after this? Exploit that you use, and then your credibility is gone, right? No company is hiring you anymore. If I'm staying where I am right now, I can earn money until I retire at age whatever, 80 in 50 years, but going to the dark side, your credibility is lost. Like you cannot do anything else anymore than staying on the dark side. And then you need another really big gig to keep up the revenue stream coming in. So,
yeah.
Sorry.
You've given this a lot of thought, haven't you? But
oh, the question should have been, did you resist?
What I wanted to add here is something that, well, I was a bit thrown by the question, that's why I didn't think of it. There's no need to join the dark side anymore today. That's an important addition, because we have bug bounty programs today. Instead of joining the dark side, just become a security researcher and you get paid for finding vulnerabilities on the light side. And the same thing, if you really want to break stuff without bug bounties, go find iOS exploits. And you find an iOS exploit and you go to a security company, which might be a bit of a shady one, but they pay you for that work without you having to join the dark side. So there's plenty of white or gray options without having to go full black hat.
We're also partially saved by the culture in Europe. At least in Europe, if you get caught and you're convicted, you go to jail, it will be more difficult to find a job afterwards. So there is both on one side the ethics, but on the other side, we also have some repercussions. There are other countries in the world where people who are somewhat famous go to jail and then afterwards make even more money because now they have a good name. But that sort of a culture doesn't exist within Europe. So at least within Europe, we are somewhat saved by that as well.
Okay.
Maybe a bit sarcastic thought. I think we need some of these bad guys because otherwise we wouldn't have any examples to pin on management awareness presentations as examples what could go wrong and what could happen. So yeah. It's kind to earn my white hat money to have such guys to bring it to management. Yeah?
Speaking of money, and that's the next to last question because we're already running out of time. It's really going fast. I'm really surprised by how fast time is running out. Speaking of money, so if I go to a company to do a penetration test and I find vulnerabilities, a typical answer that I get when I show it to them is, oh, we know that already. Most people are aware of what we find there. And I always get the same answer. We just don't have any time and money to fix this. So how can a software developer demand resources from management? What do you recommend them to do to say how to start an argument with management? Yeah, that's your...
So that's a purely communication problem. Developer will need to talk to somebody who has a budget, who is often a manager, and at some level you just need to speak the same language. In reality, it means that if you're a developer or a security person and you need to explain this stuff, you need to talk about risk, because risk is something that management understands, and if you're able to show the risk, to show why they should be fixing it, in my experience, they will go and find the budget to actually fix it. So you just need to realistically scare them enough to actually find you a budget.
Short spoken, risk acceptance, assigned risk acceptance. Do we have to really tell what's the impact? Dear board, please sign the consequences, because if you sign that, it's in your due care and due diligence, not mine anymore. That's not the best way, but it is a due care and due diligence factor where it goes also into private responsibility and private liability if it comes to board level. The other thing I want to add is I think we have to be better in the security to also transport the budget, what we need for that. We can't say all the time we need more resources, we need more that, so, but do a resource and a plan for security, for personal resources, for investments in some tooling, in some automation, in leveling up the maturity level, risings, increasings, always at the beginning, needs more time, and then see the effects. So I think we also have to, I said it, speak more the language of those having the budget and doing the decisions so that they can get a view on the whole picture.
Something that I might want to add here is there's two things that I always advise when people in the company ask me, like, yeah, how do I convince my boss I need to fix this? Well, first of all, what really helps is speaking the language, and another thing that managers really understand well is like money. So if you can show them, like, hey, British Airways had the same problem and it's going to cost them 18 million, that might help in convincing your boss to let you spend a week on fixing that problem. That would be a really good return on investment speaking there. So that is one thing that can actually help, because it shows them like, holy crap, this is really going to be expensive if somebody ever takes advantage of that. And the second thing I always advise is make sure you have that conversation somewhere on email. So in case that something goes wrong later, that you don't keep that email on your Outlook server from the company, but somewhere else, so that at least you have something showing that you alerted them that this needed to be fixed and they decided not to do that. I know this is kind of lame to cover your ass, but in the end, some CEO is going to say that John didn't patch the system, and if John's going to show the mail like, yeah, I told my boss I needed to do it, and it was like, nah, we're good, then John may have some other things to say in the article as well. So just to be safe, make sure you have a record of that. You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, so we also, basically in academia, we survive based on project grants, and I completely agree with what Or has said, and just one addition, so I think, or maybe just stress this, I think one winning strategy, and I mean, I've been relatively successful in some projects, and I think one winning strategy is, okay, so I've been in projects and actually I just showed, okay, I found the proof, and that the reaction was, yeah, fine, we know our system is safe. Okay? But then I found a vulnerability, and then I even showed them a fix, and then immediately I was able to get the project money for that. So it's showing a failure, a possible failure, and of course you can already like estimate what that makes, like how much this failure can cost. But I think in addition, if you are able also to show what possible solution you have to rule out that failure, that's really like the catching story.
And also being realistic in the estimations.
Yes.
If you do a risk, don't say everything is high risk, then I can't know what to prioritize.
So, last question. Our audience wants to have some recommendations. First of all, for books on security every software developer should read, and or for security podcasts. So, if you have something in mind, what would be your recommendation?
We know it depends, but there is this one book that really got you started in your career or really helped you in advancing. So maybe you have one each. That would be really cool.
If I can, one each. So one book, one podcast.
If you have.
I'll go first. So screw you guys. Book-wise, I would say Security Engineering from Russ Anderson. Because it's not a software development book, but it's a security concepts book, and it teaches you how to think about security. It's about all kinds of real-world stories about fighter planes attacking each other with radio signals and stuff like that. It's really interesting, and it teaches you important security concepts that are applicable everywhere, from the real world to software and so on. And a podcast, there's quite a few, I would say. SNCC, the company behind the dependency management tool, they have an AppSec podcast. I've been on there in the past, and they actually have pretty expert speakers there. So that might be really interesting to listen to.
Can confirm, yeah.
All right.
Well, so coming from the penetration testing side of the world, I can only highly recommend a book called The Web Application Hacker's Handbook in the second edition, and it is a guide on how to pen test and how to hack applications. But to me, like, and I'm a penetration tester, right? But I also think if a developer is reading that book, you get a ton of ideas on how actual hackers break into systems, and you can just use that knowledge that you gain out of this book to think about how to secure the applications that you're writing. So that would be the book. And for podcasts, I really like Darknet Diaries by Jack Rhysider. It's just it's an easygoing podcast. It's not super technical, but you also get to know a lot of concepts that actual hackers are using these days to break into systems, and that can also help you to get an idea on what to look out for and how to prevent it.
Please rest keep the answers short, so no justification necessary, just name the resource.
Okay, then I'm going to cheat immensely. I'm going to say you should go for the OpenSAM guide, because that's going to explain you the complete SDLC and give you all the knowledge for you to learn where you need to look for other books and other information. And for podcast, I only listen to one. It's in Dutch. It's the Nerdland podcast. It has nothing to do with security, so sorry, can't help you there.
But still, thanks.
Anything to add here?
Book recommendations?
Some recommendations?
Neither software developer nor penetration tester. Book that I loved was Blackout from Mark Ellsberg, going about the breakdown of the engine net in Europe. I think that's everybody could read. It's nice.
True.
Johanna, Laura?
Yeah, this would be rather my topic, but I have to admit I didn't read the book myself.
There can be overlaps. Don't worry.
No, I would recommend, especially if you're in the IoT domain, to look into basic books of other engineering disciplines, because then you understand what the other view on security is and what could possibly go wrong. And that's quite a lot.
Yeah, so for me, there are many books, but I think the one that actually got me into my PhD was really The Art of Computing. I don't know how many of you heard, but it's from Knut, the first 2 volumes, but actually now it's it's already the 6th volume is about to come out. The 6th volume is planned for 2025. I think it's great, like I hope it's coming out, and if you're able to read all 6 volumes, I think you get the foundations of computer science at least. I don't know, and therefore I guess also security.
All right. Thank you very much for being part of this discussion.